And so he steps out of my truck and he turns back to me and he says, "Can't come back, huh? Well, how about I go to your house? I know where you live." So I got out of the truck and he reaches for his belt line. He pulls out his pocket knife and I start backing up. And I put my left hand out towards him. I say something like, "No, no, 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 don't do that."
Hey gang, John Correa is so proud to be a brand ambassador for Heckler and Koch pistols. They're not a sponsor per se, but they have helped us out so much. The whole team, we just drag our HKs around the country to training, to the ASP conference, and we just know that no matter how poorly we treat them, they're going to go bang whenever we need them to. They're incredibly reliable, and they're a joy to shoot and paddle magazine release. Please visit them at hk-usa.com, hk-usa.com, and tell them the Ask Podcast sent you. Alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. Once again, I am your host, Mike Williver, and I remain your favorite former Fed. With me today, a new friend of mine. We'll just call him Jacob, another in the long and illustrious lines of people who do not want their last name used, and I can't say I blame him. Jacob, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it, buddy.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. So he has a really interesting story. And again, I love the variety of stories we're getting here, various and sundry things that are helping our listeners to get a mental rep in on something they may not have considered, a scenario or a situation they may not have considered they could possibly be in. And I'm sure Jacob feels that way about his situation. So to start, he is married with two young, beautiful daughters. And I know that feeling. I have two daughters myself and a granddaughter. So daughters are the best. Being a daughter dad is pretty rad. He hails from the formerly free state of Michigan, and he is a chief of operations at a local cemetery. So that's an interesting line of work, one that I didn't think I suspected would be on our show, but here Jacob is anyway. So talk to us about you growing up. You know, you're from Michigan. I assume you're not from Detroit, so I assume you may have had some experience with firearms in your youth. So talk to us about growing up. Was it a 2A sort of household? Did you guys go shooting, anything like that? Self-defense classes, jiu-jitsu? Talk to us about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm from small town Michigan, which I prefer. Definitely a 2A friendly home, but my parents didn't really have guns when I was younger, but they were very much in favor of that freedom. I actually encountered firearms through a friend of mine I met in a homeschool group. He got me into hunting about age 14. But prior to that, as long as I can remember, I've been interested in the tools of self-defense and the training that goes along with that. So I did martial arts for a little over a decade. Something I'm getting back into now. And then, you know, as I got older, after having met that friend and done some hunting, and my interest in the tools of self-defense changed from, you know, classic martial arts weapons into firearms and that kind of thing. So pretty much as quickly as I could, I got my concealed carry, got a carry gun, and I've continued to pursue that interest to this day. I've worked in different security fields as well before this. So,
yeah, I have a sense that you're very much like a lot of our viewers and listeners in that regard. I'm not sure why else you would watch Active Self-Protection unless you were interested in self-defense and self-protection. So how long have you had a CCW in the state of Michigan?
A little over 10 years now at this point.
Okay. So talk to us about that process in the state of Michigan. Is it a state mandated process for getting a CCW? How hard is it to get? What do you need to provide, and what kind of training is there, if any, that goes along with that process?
It was a one-day class, like 8 hours, maybe 10 hours, you know, and there was some class time and then some range time. I didn't find it difficult at all. I enjoyed it. You know, I was interested anyway. I didn't think it was terribly onerous. You know, it wasn't super expensive. You can find different classes at different price points. And then, I mean, once you take the class, if you've passed, obviously, and you don't have a criminal record, you know, you go turn that paperwork in and they mail you your concealed carry license.
So talk to us about your first gun. A lot of people buy something goofy for their first gun and some goofy equipment. John talks about his box of shame of holsters and various accoutrements that he has compiled throughout the years that he'll show his students to show, hey, it's not just you. I bought some goofy stuff back in the day. So give us an idea of your first gun, make, model, and caliber.
So I think the only mistake I made with my first buy was I bought it in 40 caliber.
Okay.
Um, I have never been a wealthy man, so instead I've been careful. So I did a lot of research, which also is fun anyway,
Hmm.
reading articles about guns and whatnot. But what I finally landed on was a Smith and Wesson M&P.
Okay.
So originally I bought one of those in 40 caliber. It got stolen when I lived in Texas,
Oh boy.
so I moved to the M&P in 9 millimeter,
Okay. So it was the full size MP or the compact?
full size.
Okay. And what's the capacity on that in 40 cal?
In 40 cal, I think it was 15.
Okay. That's respectable. Yeah. The agency I used to work for, when we went to semi-automatics, the first one that they, the first one they issued was the Beretta 96D Brigadier. So it was basically the M9 in 40 cal. And I don't know how they managed it, Jacob, but I got to tell you, they managed to make this enormous hand cannon that was difficult to conceal because most of our job was plain clothes. And it only held 11 plus 1. So, I mean, well done, really. Only the government could screw something up that royally. But through the years, we moved
No
on.
kidding.
We finally had some sense and moved on to an HK USP 40, which was great. And then moved to 9 mil a few years. Well, we had 9 and 40 for a long time. But then one of our firearms division did a ballistics test and found that when using the ammunition that we were issued, the terminal ballistics between the 9 and the 40 were almost identical. So there was nothing to be gained by carrying the 40 cal. We're going to get letters about this. I know the 40 cal community is still out there. They're alive and well. Nothing wrong with 40 cal. I just figure a little less recoil and more rounds is, better for me. So
Yeah, that was exactly my thought. And I ran into this YouTube video. It was a doctor giving a presentation on different firearms injuries. And my biggest takeaway from it was he said, people shot with handguns run away. People shot with rifles die.
yeah, that's
So
not entirely untrue. I mean, that I had a lieutenant with the San Diego Sheriff's Department. I was a task force officer, and he said, "Just remember, we issue you these pistols so you can fight your way back to your rifle."
right.
Yeah, so that's a truism. So, in your job at the cemetery, will remain unnamed. You are a boss, you're chief of operations. So you had an employee with some problems. So talk to us about that without naming any names, obviously, and about what happened on that fateful day.
Okay. So as a business, we run it as a ministry. This is a family business. I started when I was like 12, volunteering, picking up trash, carrying water. Worked my way up the ranks. I left for a while and did other things, to make it on my own and whatnot. But my father and I, we both see this as a ministry. So we sometimes will hire people who might have a bit of a criminal past, not career criminals, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But, people make mistakes, and I don't think that should follow you forever.
100%.
One of our best guys, I remember when he started, I was still a young man, and he started working with us on community service. And it's something like 26 years later, and he's still here and one of our most dependable dudes. So
You love to hear that. Yeah, I
um,
mean, the idea of the correction system is supposed to be to correct people's behavior. California is called the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So not a lot of rehabilitation, sadly, goes on in our institutions anymore, but that is the idea, is that people are supposed to pay their debts to society and then come out and change their ways. So I love to hear that you're working it as a ministry and that you're helping people out. That's great.
yeah, we really try, and it adds some meaning to the job too. It's already to me a meaningful field of work, but I just try to help whoever I can. So we hired this guy. We knew he had some drug issues in the past, but he was clear of them at the time we hired him. So he worked with us for a while, and then had a relapse, I guess you'd say. So he actually went into rehab, and we held the job for him. We're trying to help as much as we can. And he came back and was doing a lot better. He was healthier, he was happier. And that continued that way for a few months. And then one day, I was in my office and I get a phone call from one of the other guys out there, and he says, hey, man, I need you to come back and check this out. Um, I guess I'll make up a name for him. Ben, we'll call him Ben.
Ben, it is.
Uh, Ben just drove a truck into the ditch. I was like, well, all right, yeah, I've got to come out and see what's up. So I head out there, and he's kind of like nodding, like almost falling asleep on his feet, kind of deal. So it was pretty clear that something was going on, and he had legitimately just run off the road into a ditch on the property.
For those not familiar with people, quote unquote, on the knob, that's usually indicative of a heroin or some sort of opiate problem.
I walked up to him, tried to talk to him. Took a second to get his attention, but I basically just explained to him, hey man, obviously something's going on. We're going to have to go and get you tested. And he protested a bit. He was kind of upset, and I just tried to calm him down. I stayed calm. I mean, like I said, we deal with this not regularly, but we've dealt with it before. And I'd even had similar conversations with this guy before. So I just explained to him, man, there's kind of no way around this now. You're sitting in the truck that you drove into the ditch. We've got to go do this. Let's get it done and keep moving forward. So I get him in my truck, and we head down the road for the testing site, which is like 5 minutes down the road, just one of those little healthcare facilities, little bit of an awkward ride, a little bit of an awkward time sitting in the waiting room. Eventually, they call him back. He goes, and a suspiciously short time later comes back out, and he's more agitated now. I wasn't quite sure what to do, and I see a nurse kind of waving me over, and she says, hey, he's refused to take the test. Like, I don't remember at this point if he'd tried to fake the test and then refused when they caught him after that, or what, but I do remember trying to convince him just to go do it. I was telling him, Ben, if you do the test, it's pretty clear that something's going to be on it, but tell me what it is, go through the test, and we can figure out a way forward. We're still here and willing to help you.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask what was his perceived consequences if he popped dirty on this. So you think you just answered that question?
Yeah. I find that communication is at the same time never good enough, but also absolutely key. You know what I mean? Like, it's frustrating and very, very necessary. So yeah, I was trying to communicate with him as clearly as I could, and I'm trying to encourage him to take the test and keep working with me. And I explained to him that if he didn't, I didn't really have any other choice but to let him go. And he got a bit more agitated, and we end up in the parking lot. And he refused and he refused. And finally he said, take me back to the office. I'm leaving. I said, all right, man, I can't force you. I'm pretty much begging you here, man. But he wouldn't. So we hopped back in the truck. We're driving back to the office. We're talking a little bit more. I'm still trying to convince him to just take the test. And at some point I said, like, his final refusal, I said something about being disappointed. And I'm not sure why, but that word specifically seemed to set him off. Like, he got angry. So then he's kind of yelling and cursing at me and whatnot. Luckily, short drive back to the office. So we pull in, I park. He's still kind of yelling and cursing at me. And I said, man, I understand you're upset. I'm sorry this is going this way. But once you get out of the truck, you got to leave and you can't come back. And so he steps out of my truck and he turns back to me and he says, I don't remember his exact quote, but something along the lines of, can't come back, huh? Well, how about I go to your house? I know where you live.
Oh boy.
I live next to one of our cemeteries. So yeah, that was, to me, that really crossed the line, and so I got out of the truck and told him as much. I just said, and again, I don't remember my exact quote, but something along the lines of, Ben, that was not okay, man. You crossed a line there. You can be upset with me. You can curse me out, but you don't threaten to come to my home. That's where I keep my wife and daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't like that at all. I don't know why I thought continuing a conversation would do any good, but it is what it is. So at that point, we're standing next to his vehicle, kind of like between his vehicle and mine. And after I tell him, that crossed the line, you can be mad at me, curse me out, etc. He starts. It's kind of like things slow down. He reaches for his belt line, and like got a little bit of tunnel vision. Everything like zoomed in on his hand,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just watching this happen, and in a little bit of disbelief, like he's not doing this. But he does. He reaches into his pocket. He pulls out his pocket knife, and I start backing up. And I put my left hand out towards him. And I think, because I'm a dork, I say something like, no, 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 don't do that. As I'm backing up. But he draws the knife, takes it out. And this is all, still kind of like slow motion. I see him start opening the blade. And then I hear it click. And at that point, I'd backed up a little bit. I reached into my shirt. I carry in a shoulder holster. And I drew my firearm, pointed it at him, and said, stop. And at that point, like he, was looking at me. He sees that. He stops what he's doing.
Mm-hmm. Good choice. First good choice of the day.
Yes. He stopped. He closed the knife. He like tossed it at me underhand. And then at some point he dropped his keys. I'm not sure when that happened. I don't know if it was while he was grabbing his knife or what, but he goes over to grab his keys. And I told him, hey man, don't drive like this. Just wait. We got to sort this out. Of course he doesn't listen to me. He grabs his keys. He hops in his car and he takes off, like drives over one of the sections, hits the road, and he's out of there. And then I called the police. I don't remember exactly what I told them either, but it was pretty basic. Something along the lines of, hello, this is the address. One of my employees just pulled a knife on me. I presented my concealed carry. He's left. That was about it. I told him which direction he was heading and what he was driving.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Let me ask you, when you said you focused in on his hands, can you remember what it was about his demeanor that changed, that made you realize, it sounds like very quickly, that this was about to escalate? Because it sounds like you keyed on that pretty quickly. We talk about, our CEO, Stephanie Widener, famously talks about radically and rapidly accepting reality, meaning, if something's happening, you need to accept that as quickly as possible, because the time it takes you to process the fact that a bad thing is happening can cost you precious seconds in the event that you have to defend yourself. So can you remember what it was about him, or just the motion towards his waist is what cued you in?
Yeah, I think it was good training and a lot of mental reps. It was more than just the motion of his hand. I think it was his body language. I'm sure that you're familiar with that look someone gets when they're ready to attack you.
Indeed.
Right? Like the shift in their stance, their shoulders hunching up a little bit, that kind of thing. I mean, I've done specific training on knives too. Like I worked security at a hospital and we did knife training. And so aside from that, watching the active self-protection videos and seeing knife attacks, and I'm very aware of the danger that a knife presents and the damage it can do to your body, So when I saw his body language change and his hands start moving, I guess it wasn't a foreign concept to me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We talk all the time, maybe too much, I don't know, about mental reps and how important they are. First of all, they're free, right? A mental rep is 100% free. You don't have to pay anyone. There's no equipment involved. You just say, ask yourself in any given scenario, in any given situation, any given environment, if something happened right now, what would I do and how would I do it? Where is cover? Where is, am I prepared with my training? Have I shot enough? Have I done enough dry fire? Have I had that conversation with myself that I'm actually prepared to use deadly force if called upon to do so? So yeah, I do understand exactly what you mean, and there's a reason I never took an ambulance ride in 30 years in law enforcement. It's because I made very, very sure I was paying attention to those things going on around me. And you're call them spidey senses, call them whatever you want, but those things only get better with time. The more mental reps you get, the more training that you do, the better that becomes. So, do we know what ended up happening to Mr. Ben? Did he end up getting arrested, and what happened with that? The police contacted you?
Yes. Um, they pretty quickly went to his residence. They didn't find him there, but it was, I don't know if it was later that day or the next day, but pretty quickly they had him in custody. He was charged. I don't remember the legal terms for what he was charged with. Anyhow, he was charged. And later, I was contacted by a lawyer. They asked me if I was all right with reducing the charge, like basically him taking a plea.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him I was. I wasn't trying to ruin the guy's life. I just wanted him to get the help that he needed, and at this point, get it elsewhere.
Right. Have you seen him or interacted with him since?
No, not at all.
So there was no last paycheck or coming to pick up his stuff or anything like that. That's why I was asking. So I got to say, I think our listeners are probably thinking the same thing. I'd be pretty nervous knowing that someone that willing to employ violence, who has already mentioned my home and where I live, I would be a little on edge for some period of time about the safety of my family, safety of myself, the safety of my possessions. Is that something that you've been worried about or concerned about at all?
A little bit, yeah. Definitely for a few months, I was a bit more vigilant. Um, that reminds me, actually, I remember a detail that I overlooked.
Sure, go ahead.
The story there. The first thing I did was call the police, and then I immediately called my wife. I want to tell this bit because I think it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Shows her in a good light. So I called her. She answered, and I didn't say hello. I didn't say how. I just said something like, "Darling, grab the kids, get in the car, go to mom's." She didn't ask any questions. She just said, "Okay," and she did it.
Nice.
So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, let me insert something there since we're talking about it. As a concealed weapons holder, this is a great trading point actually. As a concealed weapons holder, as an off-duty law enforcement officer, it is critical that you communicate to your family ahead of time. Anyone you're going to be out in public with any regularity, communicate to them. Hey, I've going to be carrying a firearm as an off-duty officer, as a armed citizen, whatever the case may be. And so if this, then I need you to do exactly what I tell you. So if we're in the midst of an armed robbery, or if someone tries to steal your purse or whatever, I need you to not think too much. I need you to listen to exactly what I tell you to do, and don't think about it. Just do what I tell you to do. So for me, with my wife, for example, I told her, if something happens and someone draws a knife or a gun and says, "Give me your stuff," I'm probably going to say to you, throw them your purse, drop your purse, and go. Just go. I don't care where you go. Go away. Go somewhere else where I'm not. So great training point, Jacob. Thank you so much. So if you are a concealed weapons holder or off-duty officer, make sure you have that conversation with your wife or husband, or your significant other, with your kids, so that they know what to do and what not to do. So the fact that your wife didn't ask a lot of questions, or any questions for that matter, is actually excellent. Had you guys ever discussed this prior to that day, or no?
Yeah, actually, she encouraged me to carry every day, because at that point, this was a couple years ago now, and I'd been carrying for quite a while, and I carried as part of previous jobs, but I didn't carry every single day. Some days you're busy, or it's a late morning, and she would actually, catch me and say, "Hey, put your gun on. You've got it. You've got your training. You need to have it rather than not have it." So she's a wonderful wife. We've talked about it in depth. I mean, even before we got married, that was something that we talked about, to make sure we were on the same moral page,
Hmm.
you know.
No, I love to hear that. So has this incident changed anything about the way you train? Do you train any more, any harder? Have you changed your training regimen at all, or is it pretty much the same as it was before since this worked out so well in the end?
No, it definitely changed. I mean, I think it worked out as well as it possibly could have, given the input, right? The output was best case scenario.
Hmm.
You know, I didn't get cut, he didn't get cut, he didn't get shot. We went our separate ways. We can go about our lives. But it was still, man, that was probably the closest I've been to a lethal incident.
Sure.
And so I thought about almost nothing but that for 3 days. You know, I was a little bit of a zombie. But I tried to think it through as carefully as I could. And so I've definitely made some changes. I don't need my wife to encourage me. If I am not sleeping or in the shower, I have my gun on me. You know, it's a responsibility that I've chosen to take up, and I take it seriously. I practice drawing and dry firing every day. I continue to do a lot of mental reps. I haven't missed a single episode of the Active Self Protection podcast since I discovered it.
Let's just stop right there. That's the most important thing I think in any training regimen is listening to every single episode of the Ask podcast. Let's be honest.
Definitely. It's encouraging. It's informative, you know?
Well, I'm glad. I'm flattered. Thank you for saying that. Talk to us about PTS. It is possible for something like this. Actually, let me digress for a moment. When you wrote in, I think it's important for listeners to know, it wasn't until you heard a particular episode of this show that you felt like this story was worth telling. And when you wrote in, you said as much. You're like, I didn't think this incident was really all that important or interesting or informative, or there's lessons to learn until I heard another episode. And I love that you included that, because I guarantee there's someone listening right now who has a story to tell who doesn't think it's interesting or important. And you won't know if it's podcast quality story or not unless you write to me at mike@activeselfprotection.com and let me look it over and have a look. You'd be surprised. I think this is a great story and a great set of lessons for a couple of reasons. One, it ended well as it could. As you said, no one got cut, no one got shot. Everyone went about their way, and that is the best outcome. We talk a lot on the badge cams about a bad outcome, and a bad outcome can be when a cop is forced to shoot someone. He or she almost certainly would have preferred not to shoot that person, and so injuring and taking someone's life is a bad outcome. Maybe a righteous outcome, maybe justifiable. Doesn't make it good, quote unquote, if that makes any sense.
Right.
So what
Absolutely.
lessons can we pull from this? I think number one, probably the biggest one is, as Jacob said, well, you got to be prepared. Success is preparation meets opportunity, right? And this isn't exactly like that. It's a little different, but the idea being, had he not thought about his self-defense, had he not armed himself, and had he not trained, this very likely would have ended with him getting stabbed God knows how many times by his former employee. But because he was prepared, because he had trained, because he was armed that day, he had his tools with him, he was able to avert that kind of disaster. And let's talk about another thing that I think is critical here. Pre-attack indicators. We talk about them a lot on the channel. A lot of trainers will talk about pre-attack indicators. And this guy didn't give a lot. Now, Jacob, I think it's safe to say your senses were heightened because he was agitated. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So, the pre-attack indicators were, I think the first one is how agitated he is. So you're a little bit on edge, but then the fact that you were able to cue in on the fact that he's reaching towards his waistband, towards his pockets, what's happening? I need to get ready. Paying attention to that stuff is so important because we say it all the time. Red flag goes up and normalcy bias will frequently kick in. It'll be like, he's probably just reaching for a stick of gum, or you want to, make it something that it's not, or make it all better by wishful thinking. And you didn't do that. So kudos to you for that. What would you, if you can go back and do anything differently, not that I think you necessarily should or would have to, I think you did handle it pretty darn well. If you can go back and do anything differently, would you, and what would that be?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And that was one of the main questions I spent those 3 days really, really mulling over.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to go through this whole exchange with a fine-tooth comb. I thought about, well, should I just have let him go and not even gotten out of my truck? But then I don't think that was the right thing because he had threatened to come to my home where my wife and daughters were,
Right.
and I think it's my responsibility to protect them. Could I or should I have not drawn my gun and just, you know, tried to intimidate him and say, "Hey man, I'm not scared of you, put it down." This is, I, there's an almost infinite number of things I could have done differently, but I wasn't fully in control of that situation because it involved another person.
Mm-hmm.
He made his own choices.
He gets a vote.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the Bible says, as much as you can, and in as much as it's up to you, live in peace with all men.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's not up to you.
Right.
And I try to live that out, and I didn't end up pulling the trigger because I didn't have to. His body language changed.
Right.
It went from that aggressive, I am coming to hurt you, to, oh goodness, please don't hurt me.
Yeah,
clearly enough that was communicated to me. So,
which is what you want.
I don't. Yeah, that's the intent. It's the whole purpose of the self-defense attitude is to stop harm from being done.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think at that time there was anything I could have done differently. I guess we have made a change in our policy because, this was a work thing. It was just me and him going to the drug test and coming back. So we no longer do that solo. If I have to take someone to get a drug test, I will get another supervisor or someone, and we will all go together.
Yeah, it sounds like a great policy change. In law enforcement, transporting a prisoner whenever possible, for example, it's kind of akin to what we're talking about here. It's to be avoided to be done by one person at a time, unless you've got a cage in the back of your car, in which case maybe that's fine. But so it's not a dissimilar thing. I think two people is a great idea. It's a pretty unique situation you find yourself in because you're actively going out and seeking out people who other people might not want to hire. So you're going to find yourself in this position more likely and potentially more often than another business would. And I do commend you for sure for doing what you're doing. I was the nicest cop most people who got arrested by me had ever met, if that makes any sense at all. I once got a Christmas card from a guy I arrested. And the reason for that is that's a true story. I still have it. The reason for it was sent to work, by the way, not to my house. The reason for that is that I find you draw more bees with honey than vinegar. It's a cliche, but it's true. Criminals are human beings. They should be treated with respect and dignity whenever possible. Until it kind of like in Roadhouse, be nice until it's time to not be nice. I found that to be an absolute truism. I commend you for what you're doing in your line of work. It's tough work to begin with. You're dealing with kind of like law enforcement. You're dealing with people on their worst day ever, or one of the most traumatic, difficult times of their life. When they're burying a loved one. So I get the sense that you're good at that in all those aspects, whether it's with a customer or with a potential employee. Jacob, before we part ways, is there anything you wanted to add? I don't want to leave anything out. I'll make sure we tell your whole story.
I don't think so. I usually try to listen more than I speak, and this has been a lot of speaking for me. So I don't know that I haven't already spoken too much. I can't think of anything more that I've left out. And man, I'm just so excited to be here and talking to you, and at the opportunity that my story could help other people. I'm pretty happy, man.
It absolutely will. Nothing makes me happier than to hear people will write to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I heard a thing on your show and it meant so much to me because I went through something similar." We've even had guests come on who say, "I heard one of your guests say something that happened to them post-shooting, or a feeling they had, or a PTS symptom they had. And I realized, hey, I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. There's other people out there, been through what I've been through." So I promise you, your story will, first of all, it'll give everyone who's listening a mental rep. So that's invaluable. And I'm sure somebody out there will have something similar happen to them that they'll be able to identify with. So first of all, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time, appreciate you reaching out. If it weren't for folks like you, there wouldn't be an Active Self-Protection podcast. It would be just me talking to myself, which I do anyway for free. So thank you for being prepared. Thank you for training and being ready for this and not ending up on the news. And thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure and my honor. Thank you for what you do, Mike. God bless you.
Alrighty, gang. Hey, happy day after Thanksgiving for those of you listening to it on the day it comes out. I hope you had a wonderful day with your family and friends. It is time now for the Gutowski Files, starring Stephen Gutowski. Now, Stephen, as you well know, it is now Tuesday, not Friday, so our Thanksgiving has not happened yet. But do you have any big plans? Are you going to be home? Are you going to see family? What are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Going up to Pennsylvania, have a nice Thanksgiving feast with the family. Try and see everyone who lives up there.
Yeah.
In all different areas. Meet my close friend's new baby. That'll be fun. So yeah, looking forward to it for sure.
Speaking of babies, me and the lovely and fetching Mrs. Williver took our granddaughter to the grocery store for the first time, and I can't tell you how exciting that was for her. So many new things to see, and every person like 50 and older would have to stop and say hi to her, so I didn't mind at all. I was showing her around.
Of course. Kids are great. What about you? What do you?
We're actually hosting this year. Everyone's coming to Rancho de Mike, and nice. We're doing the whole 9 yards. The huge, turkey, stuffing, potatoes, pies. My daughter's a pastry chef, so she's making some killer pies. Apple pie with the lattice and everything, and the big, sugar grains on top, and maybe a pumpkin pie. I'm not sure, but it's going to be awesome.
Fantastic.
And despite me, John, and Neil having our weight loss competition in October, we're all still down. But we've given each other the week off, so we're going to start again next Monday. I
found that Thanksgiving kind of ruins your diet plans a little bit. I remember I first lost like 50 pounds a few years back. The week that big weight loss effort ended was Thanksgiving.
Oh, great. Well,
it didn't. Now, to be fair, I didn't gain all that weight back, and I've been able to keep it off for the most part. I've gained a little back, but so it wasn't a total yo-yo thing. But yeah, after going strong for a while, you get to Thanksgiving, and all right, I'll take this week off, but then that can turn into, all right, I'm done with the diet. I'm just going to try and maintain now.
One of my favorite memes is, please don't blame the holidays. You were fat in August. Anyway, so today we are discussing an article over at thereload.com. Oh, by the way, Stephen is the founder of thereload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast, which is available on all of your major podcast outlets and YouTube, both the full show and snippets. And you get that a day early, right, if you're a member of The Reload?
Absolutely, and you get the opportunity to be on the show.
That's true. I've heard on a number of occasions you've had listeners come on the show and ask questions and talk about how great you are. I should start doing that. I think my ego needs that kind of a boost. Anyway, today we're talking about an article entitled "Gallup Support for Gun Control Drops as Gun Ownership Rises," which kind of makes sense. But there's a lot to unpack in this poll, Stephen. You've actually poured over the raw data that Gallup has provided over the various years they've had this poll, going back, I believe, to 1959 is what you told me. So
yeah,
there's trends, and I think your overall point here, more than anything, is just to look at these sorts of polls as trend lines and not necessarily as conclusions or as absolutes.
Yeah, I mean, polls are not. They're not an exact science, I guess, would be one way of putting it, in the sense that, like, okay, Gallup shows that gun ownership increased, or the number of people reporting a gun in their home increased 3% from last year. That would be, something like 7 million new gun owners in the United States, which, by the way, would put you up somewhere around 118 million American adults report having a gun in the home at this point. At 46%, and which is huge. And I think also validates the claims that we've seen from the industry over the last couple of years, where you had industry surveys showing millions and millions of new gun owners, and now you have public polling backing up some of those claims. You had the Associated Press had a poll earlier this year that showed the same exact number at 46%, and a new high for them as well, reporting a gun in the home. And so, it's just further evidence. It's not, none of this stuff is a lock or perfect. Mm-hmm. And you always want to make sure that you're looking at all the evidence that's out there whether it goes towards whatever your preconceived bias might be or against it. You're just trying to get the best picture you can. And so you had these dealer surveys that the industry did during 2020 and 2021 that showed this big increase. You had the background check numbers from the FBI showing big increases in the number of background checks on gun sales at the time. And so we had this indication that there was a lot of sales going on and that dealers were saying a lot of new people were buying guns. And you had a lot of news reports that had anecdotes about new people buying guns. And now, a couple of years later, we're starting to see some of the public polling surveys show the same effect, a little bit delayed because that's something you might expect
Sure.
in this area. But it takes a little while for surveyors to reach out to the representative samples that include these new gun owners and so forth. But at the same time, you don't want to get too excited or too zeroed in on one poll or one poll that shows a 3% increase and 7 million. That means absolutely we had 7 million new gun owners. Because
right.
if you look at this poll, a couple of years ago, it showed a 6% drop in gun ownership.
Not likely.
Right. Back in 2019, from 2018 to 2019, it showed there was, gun in the home went from 43% down to 37%, which is probably not what happened. And then the next year it went back up 5 points.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be reticent about these year-to-year shifts that you see in these polls. It's not like they go out and survey every single person. They get a representative random sample to try and give you the best possible picture of what the landscape is, but it's not going to be down to the decimal place, I guess, is what I would caution against. But more important than, the shift from year to year here is the long-term trend. Because one of the nice things about Gallup polls is that Gallup's been around forever.
Yeah.
And they've been doing the same exact poll forever. The first one they did on this exact topic, do you have a gun in your home, was back in 1959, July 23rd through the 28th. And they found 49% said yes and 51% said no. And they've continued to do this poll. Occasionally, they've really actually kind of in since the 90s, they bumped up how often they ask this question.
It's every year now, right?
Yeah, it appears they do it basically every single year since about 2000 really since the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
Late, I guess 1989, they started doing it every single year. And one of the things you'll see in this trend, if you look at the backlog of these polls, is that, from the late 1950s through the early 1990s, up until about 1996 or so, you see gun ownership levels that are somewhere between 45 and 50%.
Mm-hmm.
The highest level they've ever picked up in a poll was 51% in 1993.
Right.
And so since that time, you've seen the numbers fluctuate really between the high 30s, mid 30s, high 30s to low 40s. And that's where this new poll is a bit of an outlier from the other ones that could indicate that there is a new level of gun ownership in the United States now, a new base level of how many people own guns, because they're at 45 saying, yes, I have a gun in the home, and 51 saying no. So that's much closer to, those earlier years before the late 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could reflect, a trend. Of course, we did see in 2011 the same result, 45%, although then it was 53% saying no, that they have an option to have no opinion, basically not say one way or the other. And so, there's a little bit of variation because of that. But, that's a point of caution there. Is like 2011 also saw 45%, but then the numbers didn't climb and started to slow back down after that point. So, there's certainly, I think, an interesting potential conclusion to draw from this latest poll, which is that gun ownership is now rebounded from a downward trend in the United States over the last 20 years, 30 years, really, I guess the 90s were much longer ago than I think a lot of us would like to admit.
Yes, indeed.
But yes, it's been quite a while. But it's there was a downward trend in gun ownership during that period, even with the number of gun sales we saw, which was quite a lot. Um, and so now we have further evidence that perhaps that trend is reversing, and more Americans are owning guns again.
So interesting thing to point out here, and I'm really glad you pointed out this sort of key, the actual numbers for these going back in time, which is available at the. Is there a link to this on your story from the Reload?
Yeah,
To
if
the
you go to
Gallup?
the link to the Gallup poll, at the bottom of the Gallup poll, there's a PDF you can download that shows
Right.
all of the historical results for these same
Yes, if you
questions
want
over
to, if you want
time.
to check this out, go to the Reload, go to the story, and right at the top there's a link to the Gallup poll. Then there'll be a link to these numbers, which I think are pretty interesting. The first question is, do you have a gun in your home? Which we could pick that apart, the wording of that. But as you pointed out to me before we started, it's important that the questions stay consistent over the year to get consistent
Yeah.
results. But then the next question, do you have a gun anywhere else on your property, such as in your garage, barn, shed, car, or truck? And those numbers change a little bit. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so this is just them trying to capture people who it's almost a little bit comical because it's like,
Right.
well, somebody might not have a gun in their home, but if they have one in their barn or their garage, I mean, you should probably still consider them as part of, the American gun owning community.
Right.
And so they're just trying to get a little bit more. It's not a significant number of people.
No.
They've asked this one back to the 90s as well, where they sort of tacked on this extra
It went as
question.
high as 6.
And
So
yeah, 6 back in 99. But that, I think that's another one of those, like, okay, that's an outlier. That they had 6%. Usually it's 1 or 2%.
yeah, correct.
This year it was 1%. So that's where you get that 46% number from. Is 45 say they have one in the home, 1% says they have it somewhere else, 50% say they don't have a gun, 4% say they
Right.
don't want to answer the question.
Yeah, what gives me hope is when it's, well, no opinion is, I guess that's just their generic language, but no opinion meaning they don't want to answer the question. I'm willing to bet. I'm editorializing now, so Steven has to put on has to go into a silence chamber to not hear what I'm saying because he's a real reporter. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say at least probably more than half of the people who don't answer the question are distrustful of pollsters, and so they're just not. They're going to say, "Nah, I'm not answering that question." That just sounds like a Second Amendment person to be obstinate and not answer the question.
It's certainly possible that there's an effect there, or that they maybe just don't even bother to respond to the poll at all.
Sure.
Because this poll, I believe, comes from a larger poll that they conduct. So it's not just these questions about guns that the people are getting asked. It's these are like they have the questions numbered here, and these are 20, 21, and 22. So there's other questions likely being asked at the same time. So to get to this point, you'd have to agree to do a poll in the first place.
Right.
And I'm sure there are gun owners who wouldn't agree to do a poll or answer these questions. You also have another question where they try to dig down a little bit more on the topic of gun ownership and get a little bit more insight. And that's where they ask people who've said they have a gun in the home, whether they personally own the gun or somebody else in the household owns the gun. So you'll see this number talked about a lot in media, which is, it's a smaller number, right, of people who say they personally own the gun. This year it's at 33%, which is actually the second highest level they've found since they started doing this question back in 2000. They was at 34% in 2011, but otherwise this is the highest level they found. It's up 2 points from 2021. So it's another area where there was an increase. So now a third of people in the United States say they personally own a gun, according to the Gallup poll. And then another 13% say there's somebody else in the house owns a gun. So sort of like, some wives might not consider themselves to be gun owners, even if their husband has a gun or has a bunch of guns. I guess that's really what they're trying to capture. And this is only adults. So, I mean, I suppose adult children who live at home still might be in that same class of somebody who's lives in a house where there's a gun, but they don't personally own the gun. It's kind of like when they ask about union membership, it's a similar idea. there's union members and then there's union households.
Right.
So, the polling usually asks if somebody in the household is a union member, whether or not the person being asked actually is. So a similar idea here. They're just trying to give a little more context. And this is why you'll hear people talk about there being 30% of Americans who own guns. That's what they're talking about, is this more specific question about whether you personally own the gun that's in your house.
Absolutely. Folks, this is interesting stuff. Do me a favor, go over to thereload.com, and check them out. Consider getting a membership. Stephen relies on your membership dollars to fund his important work. I say that every week, and I mean it every week. The guy's got bills to pay. He can't do this for free. So if you have the means, go give him some support over there. I would also like to point out that even if you don't, go to the website and read the stuff you can read. It's not member exclusive because it's all good information. The least we could do is give him some web traffic, folks. He's doing work nobody else is doing. I'm not seeing these stories other places, and he's breaking a ton of stuff as well. Stephen, what's up?
And I think if you go to the website, you can read a little bit more about the other result here too, which is that people are less likely to say they support stricter gun laws at this point than they were 6 months ago.
Right.
And I think those two results are actually connected, right? The rise of gun ownership and the decline in support for stricter gun laws. Although there's also likely the natural cycle that you see after high-profile shootings like Uvalde,
right,
where people the spike for stricter gun laws happens in the immediate aftermath, and then a few months later, usually support comes down. And it has in this case by 9 points, which is pretty significant.
Indeed. Folks, for more on this, go over to thereload.com and check it out. Stephen, I'm glad that you're probably going to have a great Thanksgiving. We'll find out more next week after you've actually had Thanksgiving. Folks, stay safe out there. Safe travels to you, and we'll see you next week. Stephen, take care, buddy.
Absolutely.